This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Jay, speaking of the union, we have a returning union member. You may remember him, Jay, from such albums as Big Heavy Stuff.
Oh, yeah, right.
Maximum Sincere and Sandpits on Second Thought.
That's right.
Now, those were two bands that we were not familiar with, and introduced to us. We liked both those records. So let's see if it's going to be a 3 from 3 from Mr. Josh Page. Welcome back, Josh.
Hello, I didn't talk over the top of your intro this time. I watched the recording of the second one. I just paused there. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I hope we call it a trifecta in Australia, so hopefully it's a trifecta.
Here we call it a turkey. Bowling.
That's true. Josh sporting the DMO Union shirt. That only took us to, I think, over a year for us to figure out how to get that.
Better late than never. US Postal Service came through.
Actually, I had to go around them, I think.
Postal Service got in the way.
I found a printer that'll drop print in Australia locally. So I think that's how we make that happen.
People, we just got to take a moment here to address the fact that when you set up your tiers for Patreon, sometimes you don't understand that something as simple as getting a T-shirt to someone will take you a year because the U.S. Postal Service is like, nah, we ain't doing that. We're not going there.
The pandemic, just for whatever reason, they just stopped delivering to certain countries. And unfortunately, we had to find another path, but we figured it out. So it's nice to see you sporting the shirt.
No problem.
So with your shirt and your first two picks having impressed us, share with us for 2023 your pick.
Yeah, I picked a Sydney band called Glide, and their first album, they put out a few EPs before this album, but their first album called Up and Croon. And they're a band, again, around my time in Sydney when I was at university, that I was more aware of Glide because I was massively into Big Heavy Stuff and Pollyanna and Blue Bottle Kiss, bands like that you guys have reviewed with other patrons. I actually probably came to Glide a little bit later, probably in the late 90s, early 2000s. But when I did, I was, really impressed and just loved the songwriting and the musicianship and just, I think a little bit different to the two albums that I've put up before. But I just think really that William Arthur, the singer-songwriter, is just a person that deserves, again, a bit more light shone on their talents, because I just think he's a fantastic songwriter. So that's why. And I really struggle to choose between this album and their next album. Their album after is called Disappear Here, but there's one song in particular on Up and Croon why I had to pick this one. I sort of, with my 11-year-old daughter, I was toing and froing for about 3 months between which album I was going to pick.
I like that there's an existential crisis around which
albums. There was.
Numerous patrons have said that there's this push and pull between one album and another, and I like I like that we're causing this sort of drama in people's lives without actually being involved.
Very stressful.
Jay, had you heard of this record or this album before?
I don't think so. When I saw the name, I felt like, have I gotten this band confused with Ride in the past? I hadn't heard them, and if I had heard of the name, I probably got it confused with Ride.
I remember the name or the album cover from something, but I don't remember why. And I want to say that they've come up in a poll. I don't remember if it was this year or last year, but I think Glide has come up at least once. Have you seen it, Josh, come up in a poll?
I would expect they would have. They're pretty well loved by a number of people in Australia, and definitely in that Sydney indie rock scene of that time of, as I say, Blue Bottle Kiss and Big Heavy Stuff and Pollyanna. from memory, William was a little bit older, the lead singer, than those guys, and he definitely kicked around a bit with Steve Kilbey from the Church, I think, as well. Like, I know now, since Williams passed away, the lead singer, but I know Steve Kilbey from the Church has done benefit concerts and sung as the lead singer of Glide, even in recent times. So I think he was pretty close with the guys in the Church as well. So who are obviously a pretty familiar band, I think, to you guys and lots of your listeners, I think.
So a little bit of history on the band. As you mentioned, they're from Sydney, Australia. They formed in around 1991 and existed until 1999. The band put out a number of EPs prior to their first record. The first album, which we're talking about, Up and Croon, came out in 95 on the Hypnotized label, which is the label of bands like Scream Feeder and Big Heavy Stuff and some other ones that I don't recognize the name of. I don't recognize their names, like the Fobs. I think that's how you say it. And Pray TV.
The Fobs are a pretty cool band from Melbourne. Yeah. So
is that a Melbourne-based label? Or
I don't know, actually. I really don't know enough about the label. I think they were part of Shock Records, which was a slightly bigger label. So
Shock had like
very indie side of Shock.
Yeah, it looks like Shock was basically like the Australian distributor for a lot of big bands. Like Union was distributed by Shock, and Lush and Paul Weller and some other one, The Gathering, Iced Earth. That's an interesting label. Old Crow Medicine Show and Iced Earth on the same record
all
label.
Over the place.
Eclectic.
That is eclectic. So the band formed in 91. The original lineup was, as mentioned, William Arthur, lead vocals, guitar, and keyboards. Jason Kingshot on drums, Tim Scott on rhythm guitar, and Mark Lynch on bass. In 93, Paul McDonald replaced Tim Scott, and then was replaced in 95 by Andy Kelly. So for this record, it doesn't look like Andy Kelly played on this record.
He played on the next one, Disappear Here, but I'm pretty sure he didn't play on this one. Yeah.
So they had, like I mentioned, there was like at least 3 EPs that came out between 91 and 92 or 93 prior to this. So this comes out in the Hypnotized label in 95. They follow it up a year later with Disappear Here on the Hypnotized label. And then William Arthur passed away in 1999, the lead singer and songwriter. And it looks like they released the final album last. After he passed.
He was recording, before he passed, So which is an awesome album.
So, and that was a self-released record, and there's been a compilation that came out and some other singles and whatnot. We put this up on Patreon because we wanted to find out if our patrons had heard of this record or if they had given it a listen. We'll share the results of the poll at the end of this episode, but here are some of the comments we got. Darren Lehman said, there are some really cool chimey guitar sounds, and some excellent melodic ideas on this album. Unfortunately, it feels like just another indie album from the 90s, and the lead singer's voice becomes grating after a while, and his range is limited. I give this record a decent EP rating. Sir, it's a decent single, better EP. Let's not get these two confused. Okay. Ian McIver, sounds like another generic 90s album with very little to elevate it to the public's consciousness. Decent single. Ian has some harsh takes for the album. Gavin Reed from Australia, he said, I enjoyed this. I had an awareness of Glide, but I forgot what it was, so I came in clean. As per a few albums, I think it's a worthy album, but not one I play a lot. My only knock is that it often alludes to taking the next step to something more dramatic and interesting, and then doesn't. Okay. Adam Rogan, I rate this as a worthy album of 9 songs. I really like their shoegazy sound, which doesn't sound generic to me at all. Some parts remind me of the 2000 band People in Planes. The production sounds weird on a couple songs, but was good overall. I'm not familiar with People in Planes. Have either of you heard of that band? Okay.
I don't think so.
Adam will have to check that out, or maybe you could submit that for our 2000s episodes. That particular band. Let's get into it. Let's talk about Open Up and Croon by Glide. Jay, tell me one thing you liked about this record.
I'm not going to beat around the bush. This feels like where's this album been my whole life? So it's really interesting that what they're combining here. I hear some Swerve Driver, but I also hear like Paul Westerberg. So it's this really cool mix up of references for me as I get into the record of these riffs on guitar that are very hooky and memorable. This layering of acoustics and electrics, which I think works really well to help emphasize, like pull out those melodic ideas, but also then can shift into this bigger kind of shoegazy, delayed out, echoey guitar sound. So you got this really cool dynamic going between, what sounds like at the core, a fairly straightforward, almost like Replacements or early Goo Goo Dolls type song, but then it's combined with these dynamics that are more like something like Swerve Driver, which gets big and epic and dissonant notes are thrown in, and there's a lot of textures from the guitars and unusual chord changes. And so it's this really cool push and pull between the two. Vocally, it kind of sits in that Paul Westerberg range where it's a little raspy. It can pop forward and really deliver a really good melody, but it also can kind of fall back more what you would hear in, like a shoegaze record where, the vocal isn't quite the focus. I think what makes it all hold together again is some really solid bass, both tone and playing, which I think it allows this record to move around guitar wise pretty dramatically from these really, rich acoustic tones to, fuzzy guitars to really bright chimey guitars, that can layer in all these different guitar sounds. And this kind of raspy vocal that, it doesn't have a ton of range, but it can deliver a melody. I think the bass is what does a really good job of like putting a little grit on everything. So even when they go acoustic, it never gets too light or off, sort of off script. When it gets a little jangly, again, the bass is there to drive it. The record has also got this great dynamic between, the bass will kind of just bite in for a section, and the drums will lock up and it'll get this really good energy to it and feel tight and propelling forward, and then they'll pull back and open up and maybe go to a halftime thing, or the parts will change a little bit and it gets spacey and airy. So a lot of cool dynamics going on here as well. So really cool integration of acoustics and electrics, really effective dynamics and just tonal balance of all of those things working together to get to a place where you've got these songs that are sometimes complex and unexpected, but also, dropping these little earworms here and there, these little riffs, these little lyrics, these moments that, feel to me like almost Replacements-esque. So really cool combination of things in here that I enjoy quite a bit. What worked for you, Tim?
Well, I'm on board with the bass stuff because, man, Mark, what's his name? Lynch is absolutely killing it on some of these songs. Caterwaul.
I'm drunk.
doing really cool bass runs on that song. Spit You Up, it more like magical stuff that's happening on the bass. Even on the songs that are like a little more mid-tempo, and he's kind of driving the song. It's just really interesting. It's can be busy at times, but it's always in service of being like a counter melody a lot of the time to the main vocal, especially in the choruses. He's doing things that are not normal, not that they're abnormal, but like he's taking some chances on that bass and doing some really interesting things that you did not hear in a lot of straightforward alternative rock. Bass players tended to be pretty samey. It's pretty, they play root notes, do a little few runs here and there, but you did not have a lot of guys that were, or people that were doing a lot of really interesting things. And there is a lot of interesting, and I think it's because William Arthur has some really strange guitar chord choices and note choices, and I think playing into that is because he's altering, and the second guitar are altering between like you said, like real chimey, delayed kind of dream poppy kind of sounds, but then they get like really fuzzy shoegaze, and then they have these really clean acoustics, some of the best like acoustic sounding guitars on a record, which can often sound very flat. These have some real like brightness and bite to them, and I like when they double them up, when you get that like acoustic electric combination. Those chord choices that he's making is allowing the bass to do some really wild things, which I really liked. And it's funny because I did not get the Paul Westerberg thing. The thing that I was getting, like from a song like Caterwaul, when you hear those guitar effects, when you hear some of the chords, when you hear him stretch his vocal, it was giving me like Sunny Day Real Estate vibes, which I know that was not in the same ballpark as Sunny Day Real Estate, but that was where that's what I was kind of going with some of this stuff. Like he's got a little bit of Jeremy Enoch in some of his more croonier moments, to borrow from the title track and album. Did you hear that at all?
I can hear that. Yeah. I mean, to be clear, the songs I hear, the Replacements, Westerberg, Goo Goo Doll stuff is like Why You Asking? There's a chorus and pre-chorus that to me hits it. Lion is another song that has that element to it. Heard some Paul McCartney start to come across here. And Spin Doctor, I could hear that as like a quirky like album track by Paul McCartney, like, and then the vocal you hear in his tone a little bit and phrasing. Tripped Up Installed is another one where I heard a little bit of McCartney as well. I just felt like the more I listened to this record, the more things I was able to grab onto, more artists. And I know we're using a lot of artists here to describe it. Hopefully that's relatable to everybody that's listening, and they get an idea of what what this sounds like. But I enjoyed that. Like the more I listened to the record, I was like picking up on like, ooh, that's kind of feels like The Frames, or that feels like Idlewild, or like all these other cool bands that I like that just, moments here and there and lines, or the way they're doing a dynamic or a tone or something. It just kept hitting all these different artists that I love. So,
well, what I thought was last thing even though this is 95, so this is in parallel to this, but there were elements of this that reminded me a little of Britpop that had, and that's where I think that McCartney Beatles influences, because obviously that was a huge influence on a lot of Britpop. And when you mentioned Spin Doctor, like if you changed that song a little bit, it's kind of got this you could change the rhythm so it's more like a piano, like bump bump dump bump dump 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 dump, and then you're getting into that like McCartney end of things. It's just a little bit off of that, but it's real close to that style, that like staccato-ish kind of thing.
Listen to the song Baby Now from Last. It is just a beautiful piano riff, like he went there just before he passed. It's like, you'll listen to the song Baby Now from the album Last. It's right what you were just saying. He's just gone with a piano instead of a guitar. And
interesting. You chose this record over their second record. So why don't you share with us what you like about this record, and maybe that'll inform us why we picked this one.
3 words for me. Why are you asking? That song I love. It's probably in the top 5 or 10 songs of my life, and it's got meaning for me from about, I think I was 18 at that time, and I remember hearing that song. I wasn't massively into the band, but that song just has some special memories for me at that formative year. So that song is why I chose Open Up and Croon over Disappear Here.
Last nail thinks me in, nothing left but time is time. Some days it's easy to see, all the times you just gotta give it all for free. If you feel crippled by time that stretches out, bite into the apple and look and spit it out. See into a life that couldn't start to dream about.
But then I just think that first stretch of 4 or 5 songs is just a killer opening to the album. There's, again, a lot of variety within the songs. And something I read the other week about William, I feel like he plays these chiming, yes, there's a little bit of shoegaziness to them, but it's nearly like they don't go verse, chorus, like you listen to it and you go, that was awesome, but they just meander through different parts that aren't particularly traditional in songwriting structures for rock as well. So, and I think maybe Disappear Here even does more than this album, but I just find his songwriting very interesting in that way, that it doesn't follow formula all the time. It does in certain songs. And yeah, so a songwriter for me, actually, that I thought of, that they might not sound like, but I actually think he's very clever, like a Neil Finn from Crowded House as well, the way Neil writes pop songs.
Interesting.
They're not so traditional. And then for me, I think I said in my message to you, I found them at the time in the mid-90s like my Australian Buffalo Tom. I really loved Buffalo Tom in the same era. And again, not similar voice maybe to Bill Janovich, but I just found elements of them Buffalo Tommy for me. But that's what I love about them, again, because there's Britpop, there's a bit of shoegaze, but it's still him and still his own unique songwriting. And as you said, the rhythm section, again, probably another familiar thing for me. I always like bands, I think clever rhythm sections that do interesting and different things. So yeah, just for all those reasons, you guys summed it up pretty well as well for me, like just influences from everywhere, but still not generic and I don't like this because it sounds like this or that. It's their own take on lots of different influences. And I do get I'd never thought of the Replacements because I love Paul Westerberg, but yeah, I can sort of see it now in certain songs as well. So
yeah, I mean, the song Something is another good example, I think falls in that. And I could also hear that as a Buffalo Tom, kind of feel too. So I think it's coming from the same place, which is, it's an interesting like combination of sounds. I don't know that I've heard before. It's interesting that we had some comments that, I don't think picked up on that, but I don't know that I've heard I don't think I've heard another band put these pieces and parts together in quite this way. So
yeah, the note I had for something is that was very Where You Been Without a Sound, Jay Massis guitar sounding there when Jay would when Jay
I'm laughing that it's like, so we're like hearing all these different bands. That's crazy.
Like, because he would do that thing where he'd pick high on the acoustic, but then also have a fuzz behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much in that style. I'm curious, when I was doing some research on this, are you aware that there was a documentary came out called Disappear Here?
It's coming out, I think. There's a filmmaker. Yeah, it's not out yet. So there's a really cool filmmaker in Australia, again, on this Sound as Ever Facebook group that I'm on, that's all celebrating Australian music in the 90s. And Ben, I don't know if I've got his pronunciation of his surname correct, Ben de Hoyt. And yeah, he's definitely a fan of Glide and is doing a documentary that I think he's using Glide as the sort of entry point to 90s Australian indie. And then I know Jamie from Blue Bottle Kiss is on it, and Tim Rogers from UMI. I do know Tim Rogers from UMI. I think he was a pretty big William and Glide fan. So I think if for any Australian music lovers, UMI are a fairly well-known band, and Tim definitely was a big fan of Glide. So yeah, so I think this documentary is still in the making, because he's a fairly independent filmmaker that's trying to get the funds up to get it happening. So
he's got a video on his website, and I thought it was a trailer for the movie that came out, but apparently it's still
coming soon rather than already out now. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Jay, is there anything that doesn't work for you on this record?
It hits a little bit of I don't want to say a law. I think it stumbles. So we talked about Spin Doctor. I like the idea of that song and where it's at in the record. I think it would have been better served, though, to not be like a full band song. I like the idea of, like, hey, I mean, it's kind of quirky sounding. It's like a plotty circus vaudeville kind of feel. Like, I would have rather maybe heard them try to just like do a piano version or like some kind of like very different interpretation of that song. I think it would have came off a lot better. After that, like, I like Caterwaul. Split You Up is pretty good, but there's some moments in those songs that are not as strong as some others. And then they pick up steam again, and I think they end very strong. Mm-hmm. So that section of like 8, 9, 10, I think there's some really cool stuff in there and cool ideas. It's just a little bit less consistent for me. So I think that's probably the weakest section of the record for me. That's really my only criticism. I mean, it is a little bit of a grower. I think there were some tracks that really stood out on first listen. And then as I spent more time with it, things kept gelling and gelling, especially his vocal. Mm-hmm. I would say like Open Up and Croon. I have to admit, when it first started, I was not looking forward to the record based on the vocal. I thought I had in my head of like, oh, I get what this band is going to be. And like, I don't know if I'm going to be into this. They quickly, the chorus of that song is much better. And then Why You Asking and something really take it in a different direction. And the vocal clicked, and I got what he was about. And as I spent more time with it, it made more and more sense to me. So it's a bit of a grower. I think that would be my only other criticism is, give this album some time and attention. I think it's worth it. It's not potentially, with one quick listen, isn't really going to deliver fully. I think get in 3 or 4 listens before you make up your mind on this band. Those are really my only criticisms. Anything not work for you, Tim?
So it's interesting that Open Up and Croon made you worried at first with regards to his vocal. When that song kicked in, I was like, oh, okay. I like all these pieces. It's got that really interesting beginning part, which again has like this shoegaze, dream popish kind of feel. And then there are parts in, I was praising all the bass stuff, but the drummer's doing some really interesting, cool things in a lot of these songs too. Something has some really cool drum parts on that song, but this song, he almost does like a 4 on the floor, like on parts of the chorus. They give it almost like a dancey feel, like a post-punkish dance feel. And I was a little disappointed that they didn't kick into that gear again. Like I wanted another like something pushing the rhythm that was like on the one. Just I wanted more like of a dance up tempo feel, and they never really hit that same high for me.
Wipe the sleep, my eyes and blow out the dust that sinks so low. You wipe me down with a sheet-eating grin. You stroke the soft down on my skin. Don't be afraid to push it deep, so far the bone that you feel. Don't pull out too soon. Open up and fall back. Deserve that. If you really feel like you're such a fake, fall back in your own track. You act like your friends, so they know that when they want you, can have you.
I really dislike the beginning of Pitch and Sway. That should last like 5 seconds, not for however long it goes on. It's way too much noise at the beginning of that record, or beginning of that song, excuse me. And I feel like there are a couple parts in the record where I think the mid-tempo-ness makes the songs a little samey. They didn't necessarily have the best choruses without having some sort of energy behind them. So there wasn't anything that was like, oh, this is a real stinker. There's just sort of some songs I was a little let down that they didn't reach the same height as the earlier tracks. Josh, is there anything that doesn't work for you on this record?
I was probably a bit the same like Jay. Like I actually just listened to it in the car today. I was just saying to Tim before we came on to the recording that I rode a bike with my wife today for about 2 hours, and we listened to the album on the way in and on the way out. We had to drive. And yeah, my wife said, God, I hate the opening to Pitch and Sway. The feedback for 30 seconds. So we're all getting older in our middle age, and yeah, too much noise and feedback. And it could only go for 5 seconds. So I agree with that, Tim. And yeah, maybe after Dead Weight Beauty, which I think breaks the album up nicely. I do think, even though I love Caterwaul, I think between Spin Dr. Caterwaul and Spit You Up, it does get a little bit, slow. I don't know if slows is the right thing, but just hits a bit of a wall, but then it punches back through again. So yeah, I like all 3 of those songs, particularly Caterwaul, but I just feel like after Dead Weight Beauty, it does hit a sort of bit of a slow point, but that's sort of nitpicking again. So no, they're the 2 things you guys said are probably exactly what I think as well, having listened to it again this morning.
Well, did this even come out in the United States? I don't think so. I think this was only released in Australia. I think Disappear Here was the first one to actually get released in the United States. Which was on Shock, the main label. So because I only found one review of this record when I was going around doing like research. It was from the Big Takeover, and Jack Rabbit, who wrote the review for the Big Takeover, was like, I didn't even know this album existed. I got Disappear Here and I thought it was the first record. So even he didn't get it when it came out. And Jack Rabbit's on the pretty cutting edge for the last 30 years of Indian alternative music. I don't think there was any chances this was going to break the United States, is what I'm getting at. So we didn't even get it at college radio. Like there was not even an opportunity for this. So any CDs I've seen of this must have been like imports, because I don't know how I would have seen a copy of this otherwise, since I've never been to Australia. Let's go over to Patreon and let's see. Yes, the poll is ended. We have the results. We're going to share them in just a moment. But Jay, tell me, is this a worthy album, a better EP, or a decent single?
It's a full-throated worthy album for me. This is like right down the alley for me. A lot of cool stuff going on here. I had a lot of fun listening to it. I look forward to digging a little bit into the catalog as well to see if it stays this strong. I was really surprised. I didn't expect the things I heard, and like I said, after listening to the first little bit of the first song, I was a little concerned, and not that it's bad. In hindsight, I get it now, but just my first impression was a little hesitant, and then I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. So worthy album for me. Where you at?
I am at a worthy album, but there are 4 songs that are on the okay end and not the, like I colored them yellow on my sheet instead of green. Green means you're good to go. Yellow means I could take it or leave it. And then if it's red, that means please don't ever play in my ear again. Pitch and Sway, He Sees a Way, Spin Doctor, and Tripped Up Installed would be the ones that, and like I said, I don't necessarily dislike the song. Like the bass on He Sees a Way is great. I really like the end section of Pitch and Sway. There's stuff I like about those songs. They didn't come together as full songs for me. So I'm at 8 songs as a worthy album. Now, Josh, this shouldn't be hard. Is it a worthy album for you as well?
Very worthy album, yes. And as Jay said, full-throated, worthy album, great songwriting, and yeah, definitely. If you are at 8 songs, you should definitely try Disappear Here and Last. I think, Jay, you'll be happy with where they went as well. So, yeah.
And he has his turkey, ladies and gentlemen. That's 3 in a row, 3 worthy albums in a row from me and Jay. That has to be a record. I don't know that anybody's gotten 3 in a row. 3 in a row. 3 in a row. Perhaps somebody could do that research for us. I don't know. We need
to get a medal
to be
if you
keeping
like,
track
a
of
medal
this.
made up or something. That'd be nice.
We're gonna send you a T-shirt that says 3-time worthy album, Dig Me Out champion, and you'll get it in 2027.
Yes.
So yeah, we need to start keeping track of that. But Josh, thank you so much for spending your Sunday morning, our Saturday evening, talking about this record and making it a good one.
Pleasure. I always love giving joy to the fellow Australian indie rock fans of like myself, that I always post what I'm going to review, and I get all these. Yay, that's great. So now I've got to start thinking about next year already.
Nice. Well, make sure you share the link in the group so that we'll get more listeners, and
we'll do.
And then Jay and I can retire and let our kids take over. That's all that sweet Patreon money starts rolling in. I want to remind folks that they can go to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com to join the union. Perhaps you'd like to pick a record. Perhaps you'd like to vote in our monthly tournaments of 27 albums, entering the Tournament of Death before one leaves. You never know what it's going to be. Could be a popular record. We might end up doing something that people know, or we might not. Every poll is different. The poll that just finished, I've never heard this band. So, and it's
how did Gaslight Radio go? Because they're a potential pick for me. I saw Gaslight Radio was in a poll.
They did not make it.
They made it to the final.
Yeah, they made it to the final,
but they did not win.
And they could be. That final included some albums that sold millions of records in the 90s versus albums that sold a few copies.
Yeah, the winner was very obscure. So.
Right. And if you try to Google their name,
Uh,
best of luck.
Mhm.
yeah.
It's one of those band names from the 90s that before the internet people thought were fine, but now you realize it's a terrible band name.
Mhm.
All the bands that had three, like Seven Mary 3, 9 Inch Nails,
Yeah.
Stone Temple Pilots, they had 3 words. They're all golden.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Google loves them.
Yes, they're easy to find. Name your band live. Good luck.
Oh, yeah.
Good luck. You have to hashtag live band every time. You just can't put live. These sorts of discussions are this is the weighty matters that we discuss over at our Discord, where the chatter happens about music and other things on a daily basis, which you can join by becoming a patron. Also, when you join, you get to read the Box newsletter, which is a weekly newsletter that comes out with a release calendar of new 80s, 90s, and aughts relevant albums, movies, books, TV shows, documentaries, etc. And 2 reviews every week of new releases, our 1-minute reviews. Lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave some positive feedback for this show. So for Jay, I'm Tim, and we're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.